Because if we're not connecting, it's just not happening. You know, like we've got to make sure that we're connecting, and otherwise we don't want to turn into flatmates. You know, we're really close friends and the relationship's fantastic and we're great parents together and it all works brilliantly. But what sets us apart from that is that intimacy, that this is something that's exclusively between you and your partner, and we have to prioritise that that's important.
Okay, life can be crazy. You're feeling like you're sinking, just trying to find a meaning. It's time for better thinking, yeah, better thinking. Time to tune in. Let's go.
This episode of Better Thinking podcast is with Kym Robinson, and we're talking about sex. Kym is a sex therapist, and we talk really about how pornography has changed the landscape of sex, how we can go out and enhance our pleasure and sex in our relationships, and also how we might go about and kickstart sex if people are having difficulties. I'm sure you're going to really enjoy this one. It's wonderful to have Kym here, Kym Robinson, sex therapist, to talk on Better Thinking podcast. I think this show in particular about sex is one that I know that String who produces this, have spoken about because it's a topic that's taboo. And so it's exciting to have you on the show and to talk about sex because a lot of people find this a difficult thing to do. So welcome, Kym.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
Tell me a little bit about, I suppose, your work and have you found this conversation of sex being taboo? How do your clients find it? You know, maybe a little bit of a starting intro that way.
So my work involves sex therapy. So it's a counselling, talk-based therapy. Clients usually come to me if they have concerns about sort of sexual function or gender or sexuality or anything. They have any kind of questions at all that they want clarifying or support with. I find that seems to be the biggest problem actually, is that people do find it a taboo topic and they really do struggle to talk about this. You know, it's difficult for most people.
Why do you think that's so from your opinion?
I think it's an unusual thing because, you know, we're living in a culture where we're surrounded by sex, isn't it? It's in the movies, it's in the radio, it's in songs, it's, you know, advertising absolutely everywhere. But that's really, really different to genuine, authentic conversations which involve vulnerability. So there's still this line that people don't cross over when they're talking about sex from their own point of view. It's okay to joke about it, you know, but when it's actually talking about real issues, people aren't comfortable talking about it often.
That's an interesting point. I think sex is often joked about.
It is.
Rarely do we speak about it in a vulnerable sense, about, you know, on a personal level. We tend to all kind of laugh about it, you know, oh, what happens in the bedroom, ha, 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 ha. Yep. But no one tends to go out and say, well, let me tell you what happens in the bedroom.
That's exactly it. And so sex therapy really offers a space where you can do that and you can talk about your thoughts, your feelings, your desires, you know, what's going on for you, what might be sort of problems that you're facing. And it, you know, hopefully we can offer some suggestions as well as dig a bit deeper and find out a bit more about, you know, what actually is impacting those factors which cause people to come to sort of see you.
Yeah. What are the sorts of reasons that people come to see you? I mean, it's quite unique. Is it performance? I mean, obviously there's probably lots of presentations, but is it performance related? Is it, I don't feel like I'm performing, you know, well enough? Yeah. Is it, I'm not sure, you know, whether this is normal, what I'm interested in or doing, or what do usual clients, you know,
I think actually a lot of people come and they do have those questions of, you know, what's normal. And I always say that actually I'm probably the last person to ask what's normal because, you know, relatively speaking, the people who have a supposedly normal sex life aren't coming to see me for any concerns. So, yeah, I really want to steer away from this idea of what's normal and what's standard, what should we be doing, because it's up to each client, each person, what works for them. People come to see me about, performance issues, so erectile dysfunction or premature ejaculation, difficulty reaching climax, delayed climax, women who have never had a climax, things that are like changes in lifestyle. So, new relationships, and they're struggling with sort of anxiety and pressures that might be coming into that. Certainly sort of sexuality and gender issues, they come to see me. There's mismatch libidos. So I think that's one of the most common things that, one partner wants sex more often than another client, than their partner.
Sure.
And that's causing conflict outside the bedroom as well, because there's sort of, resentment or pressure, or, it starts impacting on relationship dynamics as well.
I like what you said a little earlier in terms of, the norm, the supposed normal, sex life, or what people come for, that they must have the norm. They're not coming. It's the people who have got the abnormal are coming to see you. But in actual fact, the breadth is anything and everything.
Yeah, 100%. And then the question is, where's normal coming from? So are we getting those ideas from Hollywood? Are we sort of imagining a fairy tale happily ever after, from childhood? Or, are we actually getting those ideas of what's normal from pornography?
I was about to exactly ask that. Has pornography, has porn gone out and changed some reference points for younger or middle-aged or even older people? Is that something that you've noticed in your work?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's becoming more of a problem, I think, because as we're still not catching up having these genuine conversations about sex and sexual function and what's okay, we are being then influenced by the pornography that people see. So that becomes really problematic, because people are expecting they should be maintaining an erection for half an hour, or whatever, and that we're expecting that we should have a certain body type or a certain penis size, or this is what we do to our partners, and they're going to enjoy it because that's what they see. So there's a whole lot of expectations and pressures put on us, I think, from that.
I mean, it's confusing to kind of think about, what sex is as, a young man growing up or a young woman growing up, even pre-internet.
Absolutely.
I imagine similar difficulties are here today. It's just that we've got a more accessible array of possibilities that we're viewing and seeing and have been spoken about that may not have been there 20, 50 years ago.
Yeah, it's definitely impacting, and I think that there's sort of more and more problems that's coming up as a result of that accessibility. But unlike so many things in our life, if you're having, I don't know, relationship, marriage trouble or anything at all, chances are that there are people in your social support network which are going to be aware of it. When it comes to porn use, it's such a private practice that there's really no accountability. You can find yourself going down that rabbit hole of, sort of more extreme, more sort of, stimulating different topics and stuff, but there's no kind of accountability. So when you're done, you kind of go, wow, what did I just watch? Or, wow, that was a bit extreme. So it can be sort of difficult, and then sort of you haven't got that reference point conversations on having those discussions with your partner or with your friends, which makes it really difficult.
What are the types of porn use that people are using that you've sort of come across that clients have opened up about?
Look, I think, it's one of those things that everything's available there. So most people sort of are fairly mainstream vanilla porn. But I think it's, there is sort of a dark side of porn that, that can get pretty yucky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are people using porn as couples together? Is it something that you're saying is done individually and there's guilt associated with it? Is it more freely open these days? What would you say has been your experience?
People are doing it both. I think there's some level of introducing porn to kind of spice up a different variety of sex life with your partner. But I think most of the time it's sort of tends to be more of a private practice. Yeah.
Why so? Why do you think?
It's a good question. I think that, it's easy. It's one of those things that, I always sort of relate it to kind of going through fast food drive-thrus or something. It's scratches that itch. It's fairly mindless. You don't actually have to be aware of what, the rest of your body's doing or the context or anything else. So it's a very fast fix solution that tends to be solo. Generally, it's not a particularly memorable event. It's one of those things that, you just kind of do and then get on with your day, do and go to sleep for the night, But it's when you compare it to, I guess, intimate quality sex with your partner, that's something that is sort of likened to a 3-course meal. There's planning, there's anticipation, there's preparation involved, there's connection, there's memories, there's something special about that you remember afterwards. And it's just really, really different to what, using porn on your own regularly. And look, it's not necessarily a problem if it's within a relative use. So it's those who sort of are indulging, several times a day. What happens if you go through one of these drive-thrus and sort of, have a Happy Meal or something, every single day, it's going to have an impact on your life and your sort of, and your health. So is that sort of indulgence in that sense as well.
Yeah, 3 Happy Meals will do it, won't it, right?
That's it.
So probably good in the first round, but second or third and ongoingly is what you're saying is actually becomes problematic. In what way is it then difficult for someone to connect with their partner or to find that level of stimulation or climax with someone else? What happens?
Yeah, so it definitely we can become adjusted to that higher level of stimulation that actually partnered sex can't replicate. So it's that visual stimulation, or we get used to a certain type of touch or technique or circumstances where that takes place. And then it actually can be quite difficult to replicate that when you are with a partner. So that can impact on things. But it's also easy. I mean, there's no judgment when you're on your own. There's nothing, there's no performance anxiety because there's no pressure or expectations or anything else. So it makes it easier in many ways than sort of the challenges of being with somebody in an intimate situation where it calls for a level of vulnerability and authenticity and being present.
So it's almost like I'm just trying to digest this in terms of we can desensitize or become used to visually watching, for example, porn.
Yep.
And if it's done so regularly enough, it takes away from the actual experience when with a partner. And that's because there's a pleasure center that can't be met. That was as intense in the physical as it was on the video. Is that what you mean in terms of the what porn has done in terms of it can change the way that we enjoy our sex?
So just to clarify, I'm not actually against porn use, but it's the sort of the frequency that people I think are indulging in it that becomes problematic as far as relationships go. There is that. I mean, I think that ultimately at the end of the day, when people participate in that activity, there's an actual mind-body disconnect. So I would roughly estimate that people have, I guess, like a 90% engagement with what's going on that screen, whether it's sort of, using your iPhones or the computer at home or something else, which means there's 10% remaining to be aware of what the circumstances are, leaving the house by a certain time, making sure nobody's going to interrupt you, and also what's going on in your own body. So it's that concept of mindfulness, and it's more about, masturbation's wonderful. We should all be doing a hell of a lot more of it, but it should be done, I guess, in a way that's kind of healthier and encourages more of that mind-body connection and sort of awareness. So that mindfulness concept of undertaking a practice that doesn't have an agenda And most of the time when people, click into masturbation, it's with an agenda based. The purpose is to reach climax, as efficiently as possible, and that can be really, really problematic. So with a disconnect in your body, you're not actually aware of things like pleasure and sensations and curiosity. So we need to actually sort of steer away from such frequent use of porn, and even to a degree fantasy involves a mental stimulation that sort of creates a disconnect with your own body.
That can't therefore be replicated when you're with your partner.
When you're with your partner, yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you want to try to do is get people to encourage them to sort of be much more present in their bodies. So a lot of problems that I see, come from people who are having trouble closing down those what I call browser windows. If you've got 30 browser windows running at a single time, well, none of them are really present. And so you can have this big problem with sort of being actually connected with your partner. Does it kind of make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Is that, just trying to tie some of those dots, and I don't know anything about, the world of Kama Sutra, but is that kind of what you're kind of explaining, a little bit of being mindful and present with what's happening inside your body, being present of your own experience, of maybe your partners, taking feedback, curiosity. I don't know anything about Kama Sutra. I could be on the wrong complete track here, but is that some of that space?
Look, a little bit. I mean, I'm certainly not somebody who's an expert in tantric sex, or
sure,
because I think that's what you're sort of talking about. Kama Sutra is more sort of a variety of different sex positions, than sort of that tantric concept of everything. But look, it comes through, and
what's the difference between is Kama Sutra is about different positions, is it? And tantric sex is more about the present and mindfulness. Is that?
Yeah, like I said, I'm not an expert in tantric sex, but I do encourage clients to be much more mindful and present in that interaction, either whether it's solo or partnered sex, making sure that they're sort of actually reconnecting with their body with a sense of curiosity and without an agenda. So just as I imagine that you sort of work with mindfulness as a concept as a psychologist, that it's the same kind of practice, that people can actually have that real practical element in their own intimacy sort of scene.
How does one practice, or what would be some of the ideas or ways to think about being mindful of practicing, for example, solo sex, masturbation or whatever it is that someone's doing? What would be some of the things that you would kind of consider would be down that line of, rather than it being, like that fast food metaphor, convenience, more exploratory, more curious?
Yeah, so I often talk about things like mindful masturbation.
Okay.
And that's, to start with, it's to sort of take away the pornography is the first sort of step, just, to practice that. And so relying just on sort of fantasy and, memories or anything that sort of, tickles your fancy. And then sort of when you're sort of moving away from using sort of a pornography stimulus, you then actually try to sort of tap into what's actually going on in your body. So it's like a reboot of all of your practices that you do. So you sort of look at it and think, well, what can I do differently? What happens if I, change up my practice and change the location, the time of day, my technique? What if I explore different speeds or stimulation or pressure or anything else? So it's one of those things that you sort of have this approach where it's much more almost childlike, that when you sort of look at a young child who doesn't yet have a concept of sex or sort of any of that mental stimulation, but they're simply touching themselves with a genuine sense of curiosity and pleasure, without an agenda of what is the purpose of this activity. That's kind of that space where we want to sort of try to get people to come into, of just saying, actually, I'm going to savor this activity and I'm really focusing on my own enjoyment and closing all those browser windows down that sort of can be distracting.
It's almost like what you're describing, going back to a more raw, unaided form of being engaged in sex.
Absolutely.
So that the aid of, the internet, pornography sites, what previously was probably more, People magazines or, Playboy magazines or whatever it might have been, we're taking away those quick convenience spaces and trying to connect with experiencing sex, sexual desire, feelings in a more raw. I'm not sure if raw is the right word, but with less influence from other things.
It's more foundational, isn't it? Like it's actually getting back to the real basics of what is this actually about, and hopefully in that pressure, that environment, we can actually sort of decrease pressure and expectations and just get back to the basics of this is a pleasurable activity, that's completely normal and natural.
And then it leaves it up to one's, I suppose, self to go out and explore those, whether they still fantasize in their mind, but it's built on their own memories as such, or whether they're taking feedback from themselves, as you say, playing with different recipes, in terms of, pressure or rate or, different place, different time, so on and so forth. We're just trying to think of what else you can go out and changing all the submodalities, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just like a reboot. It's learn from scratch and then sort of build that up again and sort of just give yourself permission to explore that space, from a pleasure focus. And it's really interesting how when we then carry that on to sort of partnered sex, then that means that you've got less of those pressures and expectations and you're actually coming from sort of a place of authentic, genuine joy and pleasure.
It must be difficult if two partners are looking at sex in a different way, where one is maybe saying, I want to have the 3-course without, the raw experience, so to speak. And another's saying, well, I've got some new ideas that I've seen on the internet and I'd like to try them out. How does that sort of how do people navigate through that, where there's a bit of a mismatch, maybe not necessarily in libido, but there's a mismatch in desire or, adventure, explorative sort of, desire?
I think that's actually, it is a hard place to kind of to work with sometimes, because we all do have our own backgrounds and we all do have our own interests. So the first part of it comes down to talk to your partner, find out what it is and find out why that particular thing might be significant and important to each person. So if the agenda is I'm looking for variety, have a chat with your partner and just sort of say, well, within your scope of comfort, what can we try? What would be okay? And coming up with some really simple ideas that works well for both people.
How would you suggest people go out and do that with their partners? I imagine there might be a fair bit of fear, some vulnerabilities that kind of come up, feeling scared. What happens if I'm judged? What can I say to my partner or not? If my partner knows what I'd really like to do, would they, put up with me? Would they still love me? Would they see me in a different light? Would that tarnish who I am? I'm just kind of thinking what would people be, hesitating about in that space? How does one go about having that first conversation?
I think it's hard. I actually think it's really hard. Like at the end of the day, you're talking about topics that are really vulnerable to you, and to be vulnerable with your partner can be really, really scary. And so many of us kind of keep on with what's expected of us. But it is hard. If using words to speak about your desires or anything else or what it is that you're wanting is really, really challenging, start with some non-verbal communication, direct them and show them non-verbally what it is that you desire and what you want, and have those conversations outside the bedroom. So, I think the Barefoot Investor talks about having regular financial date night where you sort of discuss where you're at. Why not have those same regular kind of relationship.
Sex nights, where we talk about sex or...
Absolutely. And just sort of open it up and say, how are we going this last couple of weeks? How, is there anything that you feel like you'd like to think about or to try? Or, has this been working for you? What could I do differently?
It's almost like having sex as an agenda, having it as an item to communicate, to talk about, to become involved in. I know that, the Barefoot Investors, one of the things that I think a lot of people have found that book to be particularly useful for is it starts the conversation.
That's exactly it.
And not everyone's an expert in finances and the like, but if the conversation's alive and well, you're probably doing fairly well in that.
You're doing well. You've got somewhere to go to and go from and keep improving and keep kind of working towards happiness. So it means that those problems that happened, 20 years ago or something aren't getting to impact on the rest of the relationship and everything else that kind of comes between two people if we're having those conversations as much as we can. And it's never too late to start. You've got to actually just bite the bullet, get out there, have a conversation, say, how do you feel about trying this? Would you be up for that? What can I do more of? Any of those conversations, it's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I can just imagine conversations being lots of silent pauses, right? Lots of silence. What can I do more of? And then it's just quiet, like someone doesn't want to say, this is what I enjoy. It could be kind of frightening, or what could we do different? It's like, well, nothing. Everything's just fine.
That's an easier response, isn't it?
Right?
But it doesn't change the dynamics. If you want things better, we need to communicate that.
How do people become more vulnerable? I mean, because vulnerability is really hard, right? I know in my work, for someone to come through the door, there's this vulnerability about I'm going to be judged. I'm experiencing anxiety, or I'm feeling flat or low, or I'm going through stress. And the vulnerability is I'm not doing it well enough. I'm not doing it good enough. There's something wrong with me, and clearly, we know none of those things are valid or accurate other than the feelings. We know that those feelings are true. But in terms of, it's not abnormal. It's not strange. It should be, held with compassion and understanding. But how does someone do that with their partner? If they're not sure how their partner's going to respond.
I don't think there's any guarantees. Wouldn't it be nice if we all had guarantees in life and said, oh, my partner's going to respond, throw their arms around me and tell me it's all going to be okay. There aren't any guarantees, and that's why it's called being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Would it be vulnerable if there was complete guarantees? I don't know.
No, if you had full trust, then it would be easy, wouldn't it?
It would.
So maybe dipping a toe in or something to
start off small. Yeah, absolutely. And sort of instead of bringing out all the accessories or everything else that you might want to try, say, well, how do you feel about blindfolds? Something that's sort of simpler, and sort of see if that's something that's your partner's going to respond well to.
And so in some sense, at least that starts the conversation.
It does. Yeah. And the other thing is, hopefully your partner then responds and sort of says, well, is there anything that you'd like to try too? So by asking, just starting that conversation of saying, what would you like? Or what can I do differently or more of? You're opening up a space that actually allows that authentic feedback.
And if there's a mismatch, so, one person has a particular position that they would like to go out and, experiment with, explore, be curious about, and others not in that same space. They're not willing or they're not comfortable yet. How would you encourage a couple to traverse that space where someone's been vulnerable, the other person's not there yet, and might not actually get there?
Yeah, absolutely.
But now it's it's on the table. Is that also about this ongoing conversation to be able to try and keep sex on the table?
It does come down to the conversations, I think. Yeah. So it's, is there a compromise? Is there something that could be done by the partner to help facilitate that? So if it's, say, for example, a certain sex position, you know, maybe your partner might be more, you know, open to trying that with the lights off, or, you know, temporarily, or, you know, if they're feeling uncomfortable, well, do they need, you know, more work on feeling more comfortable in that space, in that bedroom?
Is there a difference between, and I know that maybe there's some research or maybe anecdotally you've seen it, is there a difference between how men and women often experience sex? Do they find the sexual pleasure different, you know, between the two genders?
Look, I'd love to say, you know, yeah, that the stereotypes are accurate, but they're just not anymore, you know. So I see a lot of clients where, you know, the male partner might come in and they've got the lower libido, you know, so it's that sort of stereotype that, you know, men want to jump anything with a heartbeat. You know, it's actually just not accurate. And in fact, those stereotypes are really damaging, because it puts a lot of pressure on men and also on women, saying, well, why isn't my partner wanting to jump me all the time? So we've got to be really careful, I think, about stereotypes, and sort of no one wants to be put into a box, you know. Instead, we just look at two people and say, well, what's going on for you? And how's that been? And, you know, how's that impacting, and what are the dynamics around that? Sure.
Is there something in that stereotype? I mean, sometimes we see stereotypes are there for a reason, you know, that they've developed because they've seen it's something that we've gone out and recognised over time. Other times, you know, maybe they're not, or have men changed in Australia, or at least in the clients that you've seen, where it's neither one nor the other? You know, was that stereotype ever even valid?
It'd be hard to say what, I guess, those sort of sex dynamics were 100 years ago. I wasn't practicing then. So maybe they've changed. Look, I think that part of it is that society's changing. So even looking at sort of, you know, a previous generation, or two previous generations where women weren't in the workforce so much, and now that they are, but we're still sort of navigating now this sort of, you know, a lot of couples, we've got both partners working full time, we've got children, we're trying to do more and more every day, and we still feel like we're failing. You know, it's that constant struggle that's coming up. I think that there's more equality in, you know, housework, and sort of, you know, incomes and other things, and I think that might be sort of balancing out things that are going on in the bedroom as well, like those pressures and expectations are going on.
So in some sense, you know, women have more say, or they've been more liberated since they were maybe, you know, from 2 or 3 generations ago, is how I'm kind of trying to appreciate this. And so that's a little bit different in terms of maybe it's always been there, but they've got more of a voice, or they're more comfortable to say it, or it's become more of today's conversation.
I think it's becoming more of today's conversation. I mean, look, you do see some differences, I think, that in certain communication styles or processing styles, or, you know, the way we tend to think things, whether it's sort of abstract or concrete, you know, between male and female genders. So I think that there is a little bit of that. But I think that as equality is coming out more socially, it is one of those things that I think it's also sort of evening the gender changes and differences in relationship dynamics as well. So there are certainly more issues coming in.
Sure. Now, a lot of people you mentioned are extremely busy these days, you know, irrespective of what role they take, you know, work, domestically, socially,
yep.
You know, juggling all those balls. How does that sort of change the dynamic? Are people struggling because they're tired, you know, in terms of connecting with their partner? Is it you know, the when kids come along, that obviously goes out? What are the things that you see on a contextual basis that impact people's, you know, connection, bonding, you know, being together?
I think that when you are time poor and you have a lot of pressures on you, whether it's coming from, you know, work or children or whatever else, and you have sort of less opportunities, that's going to have an impact on your opportunities to spend with your partner as well. So yeah, it definitely has one of those contexts that flow on. But what I see a lot of is that in all of us, when things are difficult, it drops in priority. There's that avoidance tendency to sort of address things because it's not a space where we sort of are motivated to engage because we're struggling with it. So it drops down that priority list. Or we're waiting around for this sort of idealistic lightning to strike, and like it is in the movies where two people are ready to go at any one stage, and they're both just ripping their clothes off each other, It doesn't actually happen like that in real life. Sometimes it's really unromantic, but you actually have to schedule sex. It's actually saying, well, this is a priority and this is something that's important for us in our relationship to work on this. And therefore, we're going to demonstrate that by saying, let's schedule it. If you are time poor, or if opportunities are difficult to come by, people's sleep times are quite different. So, one person's an early riser and the other one stays up late at night. When are we going to make this work? Because if we're waiting for lightning to strike and it just sort of to appear spontaneously, it's just not going to happen.
It's just not going to happen.
If it was going to happen, it would have happened by now.
Sure. So a lot of listeners are going to be saying, I listened to Kym on the Better Thinking podcast and she said we're going to schedule sex. So let's lock that in.
Yep.
What's the rationale behind that? Is it to, just get the ball rolling again? Why is it important for people to go out and say, well, if it's not happening at the moment, we've tried all our different strategies, mechanisms, approaches. Now we're just going to go down to pulling out our calendars and we're going to say, right, this is a Wednesday night, the kids are now in bed or whatever it might be, and we're doing it at, Wednesday night or at 8:30, I don't know, might be after a particular show or something.
Yep.
Why is that so important? What's the rationale?
Because if we're not connecting, it's just not happening. We've got to make sure that we're connecting, and otherwise we don't want to turn into flatmates. We're really close friends and the relationship's fantastic and we're great parents together and it all works brilliantly. But what sets us apart from that is that intimacy, that this is something that's exclusively between you and your partner, and we have to prioritise that that's important. And I'm not saying, get out your calendars every Wednesday night.
Sure.
That you should do it whether you're not in the mood or whatever else. But I am saying if it's not spontaneously happening, make it happen.
Make it happen.
Yeah, take an active approach and schedule something in to say this is important for us in our relationship.
Yeah. And I'm assuming that's on the assumption that both parties are actually wanting more sex, they'd like to have sex, and they're struggling to be able to get that into their relationship. Could it be true with those that don't feel like having sex, that they haven't had it for a long enough time and they forget what they would potentially like? I mean, how do we approach that?
Yeah, look,
because I have sometimes clients who say, I haven't been intimate with my partner for X amount of years.
Sure.
So it could be 1, could be 10. So it's kind of like it's off the menu.
Yeah, yeah, and look, the longer that gets left, the more unfamiliar it becomes. So it is sort of bringing that back in, but in that kind of case, we can look at something like sensate focus, where it's a very soft, gentle approach to reintroducing intimacy.
What's sensate focus?
Sensate focus was first brought in by William Masters and Virginia Johnson in the 60s. And from a very sort of simple place, it's a gradual staged connection sort of activity, that there are certain things that are allowed and there are certain things that are not allowed. And as you move through those stages, you sort of build up towards a different type of more intimate activity shared between the two of you. So I think stage 1 is both partners start off naked, but if it's been a very long time and that's uncomfortable for you, then start off in pajamas or in underwear or anything else. The first partner begins by lying face down, and the second partner just touches across their back area, but avoiding the swimwear zone. Mm-hmm. And then the first partner rolls over and they begin another 10 minutes of touching across their front part of their body. And then they swap over and they take turns. So then the first partner who was receiving that touch then goes on and touches the partner who was doing the touching, and so on and so forth. And the whole idea is by restricting things from the bikini zone and staying away from that, you're actually relearning to appreciate that partner's body. So it's very gentle with no pressures, because it's not allowed that you go into intercourse or anything more intimate without an agenda. So we're coming back to that mindfulness practice of saying.
So that's the idea is you're not allowed to end up having sex. This is for two people to connect.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if people want to go out and have sex at that point? You know, they get to stage 3 or whatever it might be, and they're like, I can't handle this anymore.
Just do it on another night, or another time.
This is really about trying to connect and begin to appreciate, the other partner.
Absolutely. But it's coming from a place where, again, with that mindful masturbation concept, what we're doing here is that the touch is not designed to be pleasurable with the intent of being pleasurable for our partner. So unlike going to a massage, which is about giving the partner pleasure at your own cost, it's not about that. It's actually about tapping into figuring out what is pleasurable for you. So getting your head into, I'm enjoying this touch. This is wonderful to touch somebody or to be touched from my own place. Mm-hmm. And we're not disregarding our partner's experience. It's up to them to start on that communication and say, oh, actually that's a bit ticklish, or I prefer not to be touched in that place. So it is up to that communication to come in. But your idea is that you should be approaching that touch with your partner from a sense of appreciation and value. You're in that moment without any kind of expectation, performance pressures. It's not going anywhere beyond what it is. And you're tapping back into closing those browser windows down and just really enjoying the basics again of touching and being touched.
Is there some review or some feedback that's kind of encouraged as part of that approach, where the person who's lying down feedbacks later and says, gosh, when you were touching me on my lower back, that provided me with no sensation sort of desire experience, but when you were touching me on my neck, I started to feel, quite warm and comfortable, and I loved, the way that you touched my neck or something. What happens with that? Is that supposed to be fed back, or it's just really kind of like an internal exploration for yourself?
Definitely talk about it. Find out what's going on. But remember, it shouldn't be distracting for your partner to be thinking about your experience. So their priority is to get their head in the space where they're relearning that curiosity and appreciation and that value of the joy of actually touching somebody for their own benefit.
For the person's own benefit. So each person is kind of focusing on themselves.
Exactly. And so it's not like sex, because sex, we sort of compare it to that old baseball analogy of first base, second base, third base, home run. It's not like that at all, because, when you're having sex with a partner, you are very much considering providing pleasure to them and making sure that they're having a really great experience and everything else. But we're not making it a horrible experience. We're not going to do something that's unpleasant for them, but it shouldn't be the focus. So it should be about getting your own head into that mindful place, looking at the 5 senses. What is it that you can hear? Can you hear your partner's breath? Can you smell their aftershave or deodorant? What is it that you can smell? What can you taste? What can you see? What does it feel like? Their skin, the warmth of their body, whatever it is, getting back into that absolute basics of appreciation. I think that for partners who have been having sex for a while, they've become really efficient. they know what to do. They go through a list of things, and that's what's going to work. So they can get the job done within 5-10 minutes, you know, but it's routine, it's regular, it's one of those things that, you know, it's the go-to.
Yeah, it goes back to I think that's starting to click for me. What you're suggesting is when someone approaches sex in that way, or learning to be connected in that experience, the intent isn't to end up with climax. The intent is to go out and embrace that space and begin to kind of be curious in that space and enjoy that space, but not saying it's right nor wrong. It's kind of enjoy it with no judgment.
And no agenda.
That's
it.
And so the more you go out and do that, the more freeing you feel, or the more connected.
It's incredible how much does that performance anxiety reduce. And when you're not worried about calling the plumber in the morning or sending that email to your boss or your plans for the weekend or whatever else, and you can learn to be more present in that space, you know, women with arousal problems find that they're much more responsive because they're closing those browser windows that are distracting them, and they're actually becoming much more present and connected. So that intimacy with you and your partner is amplified because you've got two people who are actually genuinely present and really engaged with that moment.
That's really fascinating. It almost goes back to, you know, my love of acceptance and commitment therapy. It's very much in line with that, where there's a non-judgmental approach, you know,
absolutely,
without an agenda, of just kind of being, and in some sense being with yourself.
Absolutely,
first and foremost.
Yeah, so it improves your body image and your confidence of saying, I'm actually enjoying this, and how amazing it is that I have this capacity for pleasure and joy, that I'm in this space, I can share it with my partner. You know, there is that. And it just has so many practical uses all the time. It's a reboot. It's relearning from the ground up. And as you become more comfortable saying, actually that thing you did with your nails on my shoulder was a bit uncomfortable. So it's learning to hear that and to also speak up and give that feedback to your partner. And if we're talking about shoulders, that might be easier to talk about.
Sure.
And as the different stages get more intimate, then hopefully we've practiced giving that feedback in a way that makes other things more comfortable to talk about.
Because eventually I'm assuming, you know, that's stage one. When we get to stage X, whatever that might be, you know, there would be a conversation about the way that you touch my breasts or the way that you touch my penis.
That's it.
So on and so forth.
Yep.
You know, and in that area, or how or what, it becomes first of all, a really good understanding and appreciation of one's own body, and then communication of that at a later stage. It's done without this agenda of you now have to go out and repeat this, and do this in this very specific way. But it goes down and allows each other to learn about each other's bodies as well as our own. And I'm assuming through this whole process, a huge amount of vulnerability is
really
kind
hard.
of removed.
Yeah.
Well, there's huge, vulnerability to start with.
Mm-hmm.
But I imagine at stage, 12 or whatever it might be, let's do a 12-step plan.
3 stages.
Yeah. 3 stages. That's the AA side talking. On the third stage, or probably people post having gone through all the stages and done the practice, they would say, I feel less vulnerable today than I did once upon a time.
Absolutely. And we keep repeating, several sessions of each stage until we're able to sort of do that communication, because things do get a bit more challenging. So we do repeat those stages, and then it's one of the reasons why it's really good to have somebody who's knowledgeable about the process to be able to sort of give the guidelines and just double check, okay, how are we at that communication? Have you guys given feedback, and how did that feel to hear that? Those sort of things, and say, are you both comfortable? Okay, do we agree to move on to the next stage? Do we do a soft transition? So we might start with sort of upper body, or bottoms or something before then moving to kind of genitals. And how does that feel? Is that comfortable for both people, doing that check-in?
Now, imagine that's why you need a skilled professional like yourself to do so, because someone might go and say, look, everything's been okay, but I'm just really self-conscious about my bottom, or I really don't feel, comfortable being touched, on my chest.
Yeah, and that's okay.
And there might, we obviously need to appreciate it. Here's someone's history, and all sorts of things can come up there. I suppose one psychologist to another referring to, whether there's trauma or there's been some sexual abuse or, many other, things that need to be kind of considered, and, a professional like yourself needs to be involved to understand and appreciate and give some guidance around how we might approach those, or even to flag them beforehand, because they might not be what clients can even, recognize themselves.
That's it. Absolutely. And it's not about trying to get people to, do things that a firm knows, it's actually about saying, okay, what are our other options and what can we do together that's going to work for that couple?
Mm-hmm. And I suppose that firm no's are also encouraged, that this is your choice. This has to be completely 100%.
It's all about consent.
Available from you, consent.
Yeah.
Consent's a much better word. That allows it to then progress, from stage 1 through to stage 3. How much time is spent, for example, in, I'm sure there's some guides, or is it different for each different for each couple? How do couples, get naked and start touching each other respectfully and with some mindfulness?
Yeah. So start that conversation by sitting down and talking. Hey, I've just heard about this thing. Do you want to give it a go? Do you want to try it? And depending on where each individual couple are, you might have somebody who has a real aversion to being touched, and they may actually take a very, very long time, and it might be a gradual, really, really gradual process for them to feel more comfortable before moving on to sort of more intimate stages later on. But you might have your everyday couples who they've got a great sex life, there's no trouble, but they want to bring in sort of a stronger sense of intimacy and connection, and so they can go home and try this tonight. They can do whatever they want. Say, well, let's give this a go, where stage 1, we're not allowed to touch anything in the swimwear zone. And stage 2 can be a soft transition to stage 2, but it opens up that. But we're looking at avoiding things like oral sex and penetration, everything else. And then that's allowed further into stage 3. But the goal's not about, am I trying to give my partner a climax or for myself to reach that? It's about not having that agenda and just actually using this opportunity and place to be able to explore.
It's almost like the word sex therapy gets in the way, because I heard you kind of very beautifully say, it doesn't need to be someone who, feels like they're struggling. It's almost like it's about sex enhancement.
Absolutely.
Rather than therapy, because there's nothing wrong, necessarily. It's just saying, this is the way that I and my partner experience sex and have sex in our lives, and this is how we might kind of want it to be, or we'd like more, we're not sure how much more, what, and so on. But we know that we want to enhance it.
Absolutely.
This is about enhancing,
and it's a commitment,
the experience,
to each other. And so I'll have clients who might come in and they're doing wonderful, but they come back for, every 6 months for their checkup, like a dental checkup, and say, hey, this is actually really important. How are we going? Let's talk about how things have been for the last 6 months, and let's have those issues and the discussion about any concerns we might have. So there's sort of a place to facilitate that. Yeah,
the enhancement's a much better sort of space that I think people can get their heads around, because it removes a bit of taboo.
It does. You don't have to have a dysfunction to come and have a chat to a sex therapist. It can just simply be, look, it's great, but I want it to be better.
Yeah, it's kind of who would like to be fit. There's very few hands that are going to very few people are going to put their hands up and say, I don't really want to be fit. I can click my fingers, I can be fit or not. If I could click my fingers, I definitely choose fit, fit and healthy and
Absolutely.
All the like. But when we go out and think about it, sex, it's almost, it's taboo rather than saying who would like a closer connection, whether it be with their partner or with themselves, to appreciate and understand and enhance their sex life.
Absolutely. Like I give my clients a handout, which is sort of on Sensate Focus, and I always draw attention to something that's written on the second page, and it says, caution. This is a really powerful technique, that should be done under sort of the guidance of a sex therapist. And I remember when I first saw this, I thought, really? Like, okay. Having done this for a while now, and it's actually true.
Yeah.
The stuff that you see is it is actually powerful. When this is done, there is such a connection that goes outside the bedroom. It goes to two people going, we are so close. I remember recently I had this beautiful couple, and they decided to begin and do this Sensate Focus program. And they came back and I said, well, how did things go? And she was describing her experience of, what she was thinking and feeling and what was going on in her mind during this process. And she was sitting there talking about it in front of her husband, and they've been together for quite a while. And, I looked over at him and he had tears rolling down his face. So when I checked in on him and I said, what's going on for you right now? What are you feeling? And he said, this is the first time I've felt seen for 25 years, and it really was powerful. And, and there was just tears all around. Like it was just one of those things that it can be a really, really beautiful connection where people are actually having these needs met and being validated. We all want to feel truly desired and truly seen, and this can be a platform to do that.
I'd love to go into more detail about in particularly the Sensate sort of focused work. Maybe I can have you back on at some point to go through, this program a little bit more. I know you'll probably be inundated with, Canberrans and maybe, the surrounding region, people contacting and saying, how can we speak with you, find out more, because I think, really resonates for a lot of people about just enhancing their sex lives, whether, they're kind of dissatisfied at the moment or satisfied but want more. So how can people get in contact with you? How can people find out more?
They can have a look at my website. That'll give them some more information about the practice that I do, my background, where I'm coming from, and the services that I can offer. It's at www.psychosexualtherapy.com.au, and there's contact details there if they want to get in touch.
Fantastic. So psychosexualtherapy.com.au.
That's it.
Best way to get in contact and obviously spice up and, well, not even spice up, just enhance, your sex life and
get
find out more
back
about
on
yourself.
Track. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
To come out and look forward to chatting some more, and hopefully we can take that a little bit further next time.
Beautiful. Wonderful. Thanks so much.